Story 1. Back in 2020, I was in the intensive care unit for a week, dying from complications due to chemotherapy for a cancer that affected my immune system. I had a high, rolling fever. I was desperately oxygen hungry, and I would not wish oxygen starvation on my worst enemy. My resting heart rate while lying down was 178 beats per minute. I was quite literally hours from death before my doctors managed to turn it around, and it was one of the most awful moments of my life. My answer is kidney stones. Story 2. I had a vertical cesarean section, and the spinal anesthesia wore off while I was still fully open. I tried to grit my teeth and bear it, but I turned gray and began to go into shock. I had an epidural as well, so they gave me hydromorphone and I kept stopping breathing. I could feel them irrigating my insides and trying to align all the layers. That was brutal. Story 3. Gallstones were more painful than childbirth for me. Story 4. The dentist who performed my root canal did a poor job anesthetizing me. She touched a raw nerve, and the pain was intense. Story 5. I fell from a building and shattered my feet and ankles. My feet were dislocated at the ankle joints. In the emergency room, they forced my feet back into place without pain medication. They told my parents and my wife to step outside because they would not want to hear this, but they heard it. Story 6. Severe gas bloat is every bit as awful as it sounds. In the emergency room, they asked me to rank my pain on a scale of 1 to 10. I yelled 15. The only thing that partially numbed it was morphine. Second worst is dry socket after a wisdom tooth extraction. Imagine someone tapping your jaw with a hammer for 22 hours a day. Story 7. Getting a tooth pulled, but the anesthesia is not affecting the correct area. Story 8. I was shot in my lower abdomen. At first it felt strange, like a bee sting. Then the pain kicked in. I had a rush of adrenaline, but even so it brought me down. The intense pain from my lower back to my chest is something I will never forget. Story 9. I took a little league fastball right between the eyes. My nose was broken. There was blood everywhere, and the pain was searing. Story 10. That moment when someone I trusted disappointed me so much it felt physical. Emotional pain hits differently. Story 11. I watched my favorite person on earth die when I was 8. She was my favorite aunt, my ride or die, my ace boon companion. I adored her. I spent several weeks with her over the summer, and a few days before I was supposed to leave, she had a stroke right in front of my eyes. I remember thinking if I stayed awake until morning she wouldn't die. But I fell asleep. Her husband then had her buried somewhere he knew she did not want to be. I promised her I would make sure she was buried beside her little sister, who died when they were children. Now I am an adult, and I will find a way to have her moved one day. Fuck you, Uncle Alf. Story 12. I had a cervical biopsy. Why did they not give me a painkiller for that? It felt like they were pulling my throat out through my crotch. Story 13. A hockey puck struck my face, breaking my nose and fracturing my orbital bone. I will never forget the sound. Story 14. A bad reaction to buprenorphine after spinal surgery coincided with a flare of complex regional pain syndrome and dystonic spasms. I was screaming and losing control, and no one would give me a different medication, so I refused to eat, drink, or move. I skipped the next dose of buprenorphine. They gave me oxycodone and I felt better. I have never recovered from that surgery. I am devastated and do not expect to be able to work. Maybe one day I will be able to obtain my general educational development credential. It has been over a year, and my doctors do not expect me to recover fully. I will likely deteriorate as I age due to other conditions, which may leave me unable to care for myself and may cause me to die young. Story 15. She gave birth to a 10-pound, 13-ounce boy without medication. The baby was stuck for about an hour. She experienced kidney stones and a massive, draining leg infection. Story 16. Gastritis and the worst stomach pain imaginable that accompanied it. Story 17. First, second, and third-degree burns following a fuel tank explosion. Debridement, skin donor sites, and skin grafts are a gift that keeps on giving. It happened a long time ago and I healed very well, which is pretty good for a man whose heart stopped 3 times that day. Heaven does not want me and hell is afraid I will take over. Story 18. Having an intrauterine device placed without pain medication and with zero pain tolerance. Story 19. I know a man who was trying to lead a horse into a trailer. The horse refused and kicked its hind leg, striking him in the groin. His wife said it did not look like much, but he collapsed, vomited, soiled his pants, and lost consciousness immediately. She splashed water on his face. When he came to, he vomited and passed out again. The kick seriously damaged his testicles, and the hospital had to drain and treat them. When someone asked how bad it hurt on a scale of 1 to 10, he said 100. Story 20. Having a tonsillectomy as an adult was brutal agony, and it lasted for weeks. I'm healthier for it, but my God, it was horrible. Story 21. The loss of my daughter at birth was worse than any physical pain I've ever known. Story 22. I had day surgery to remove endometrial tissue from my abdominal cavity, and I could not urinate after I got home. After 4 hours, I decided to go to the hospital. Because I was in Canada, I had to wait about 3 hours in the waiting room until the man next to me asked if I was okay. I shook my head and he went to get a nurse. I was shaking, sweating, and apparently looked gray. The nurse took me to one of the rooms in the emergency bay and said she had to do an ultrasound to make sure I was not lying. I was already uncomfortable and whimpering in pain. As she pressed down, I felt the tissues in my bladder tearing, and a scream came out that wrecked my throat. She said she drained about 2 liters from my bladder and that I had been moments from it bursting. It did not feel great. Story 23. I had a bowel movement once that happened very quickly. For some reason, it felt like someone had struck my buttocks with a sledgehammer. The pain was so intense that I felt myself losing consciousness. My mind could not handle it. Story 24. First place. Testicular torsion was excruciating. Second place. I was at a firebase in Afghanistan and developed a cyst on the inside of my leg. Even with local painkillers, I could feel everything when my medic cut me open to drain it. What was worse was when the doctor said in a fatherly tone, "Son, this is going to hurt like hell, but I need you to sit still," as he showed me the surgical spoon to scrape out the wound. Story 25. I had a gallbladder infection. It was painful and I had to have it removed. Story 26. I recently had gout. It was extremely painful. My toe joint was so swollen that it was purple and shiny, and even a light breeze hurt. Story 27. I am having my cervix cauterized without pain medication or numbing shots. Story 28. Toss-up between postoperative wisdom teeth removal, intrauterine device placement, and kidney stones. Story 29. Oddly enough, the worst was getting the local anesthetic shot into my foot for an ingrown toenail removal. I kicked my foot out and screamed, and they had to hold my foot down while I wanted to cry. It has been 7 years, and I still recall it perfectly. Second was having my cervix checked during labor. I cried from the pain. Story 30. The cramps after having a copper intrauterine device inserted were so intense that I vomited from the pain. I am afraid to have it replaced. Story 31. I have not had extremely severe migraines, but I have had some terrible ones that are so painful I cannot sleep. Story 32. When the anesthesia and medications wore off while I waited for my pain medication prescription to be filled after a wide local excision of a lesion on my clitoris. The pain was excruciating. The insertion of an intrauterine device was also brutal, despite my high pain tolerance. A severely infected gallbladder was not fun either. Story 33. I caught my arm in a tire dismount and mount machine while working as an apprentice and dislocated my fingers, elbow, and shoulder. Story 34. At age 37, I shattered my tibia, fibula, and ankle while skateboarding. My foot was flopping around. It had to be set before they attempted surgery because there were not enough drugs to relieve the pain. 12 screws and 3 plates later I could walk again, but it was extremely painful for months. Story 35. I had a paradoxical reaction to anesthesia during eye surgery. It changed my pain scale forever. Story 36. I was plowing snow. The old tractor had a front blade. When I stopped, I threw my gloves on the hood of the tractor. It was a shorter Alice Chalmers. Later, I went to grab my gloves and walked to the front of the tractor. When I stepped onto the pile of snow left in front of the blade, my boot slipped and my kneecap struck the top edge of the metal blade. It sheared my kneecap off instantly, scraping the kneecap and the surrounding ligaments and tendons from the front of my leg bones. My kneecap was completely detached, loose under the skin, and pushed halfway up the front of my thigh. It hurt. Story 37. I fell 6 feet and shattered my back in 3 places. I hyperextended my ribs on one side. It was excruciating. Story 38. While nothing physical, it's a tie between my niece's death and my father's. My niece was a 5-month premature baby, my sister's first successful baby. She had miscarried previously, and our mother's first grandchild. For context, all of our elders above my mother are gone, so this was the first child born in the family in a very long time. I lived a few states away and was preparing to move farther away with my girlfriend for her new job. In rushing the premature baby, she had been making great strides. She developed pneumonia and died. She lived for 2 weeks and opened her eyes on her last day to my sister. It broke me even though it was not my own child. I cried for 3 days straight during the entire drive west and was morose for a few weeks after. This was summer 2008. I had not seen my father in 20 years. He knew nothing of the niece. He finally made contact, and within a few months I received a call to come to the hospital in December 2016 to make end-of-life decisions for him. He suffered septic shock from chemotherapy. He was unresponsive and dependent on machines. There was no catching up, no addressing the sins of the past, no closure. This came after losing my mother in January of that year and my first child's birth in April. I felt more numb than in pain. I would give the edge to my niece's passing. It really broke me more than I thought it should. Story 39. Between childbirth and my intrauterine device becoming embedded in my uterus and breaking through. Story 40. I have had ovarian torsion twice. The second time my left ovary could not be saved. Story 41. I became very constipated and felt stool trapped inside, unable to pass it. This occurred after shoulder surgery. I was taking opioids for pain after the surgery like they were candy. The constipation became more painful than the pain from the surgery. Story 42. Shingles. I am stubborn. I am a carpenter, and when it started hurting, I thought I had torn a muscle, really badly. My coworkers made fun of me because I was working with tears in my eyes. I told them I did not know. I had never hurt that badly before and kept working. When sores appeared on my chest and back, I thought it was a heat rash, so I treated them myself. It was a rough 2 months until finally a scab came off my chest and green pus started oozing out. I went to 3 doctors before they confirmed it was shingles. The doctor did blood work and came back with a puzzled look and said it was shingles. But what did you do to them? The sores were supposed to be draining, but I had healed the surface and they had abscessed badly. The pain up to that point and the 2 months until they healed were hell. I was delirious from the infection. Apparently, I walked down the street in my underwear, ripping bong hits and firing my pistol in the air. My dad stayed with me and fried so many tater tots for me. They were the only thing that made me feel better. So shingles. Story 43. I slammed the car door on my thumb. I felt so lightheaded that I think I fainted for a few seconds. Story 44. After a kidney biopsy, the hematoma felt like someone was shoving an ice pick into my flank. Story 45. I pulled my back out while trying to flip my mattress. I could not sleep for days. I was a walking zombie and the back pain was intense. The chiropractor made it worse. I tried an acupuncturist and the relief was almost immediate. Story 46. Hand, foot, and mouth disease. My child only had it for 3 days, thank God. I had it for a full week. I am a grown man and I cried. Story 47. When my wife was 15, one of her kidneys was on the verge of shutting down. She says she would rather give birth to 10 more children than go through a kidney shutdown again. Story 48. Pain is complicated. I have had second-degree burns, and those hurt quite badly. I have had a dentist work below the Novocaine, and that also hurt, but it was a different kind of pain, so it is hard to compare. I have had my back go out so badly that I began to pass out. That was also a different kind of pain. I tore my esophagus in a freak swallowing accident. Morphine did nothing to help the pain, but it did not feel as severe as some of the others. My heart was racing, and I could not really breathe. Pain is not one thing. It is a collection of different sensations that are hard to compare. Story 49. While visiting my home country of Wales, I slipped a disc in my lower back. I went to the hospital, and they left me for 27 hours in a wheelchair with no treatment beyond morphine. I cried and screamed the whole time. It traumatized me for life. They sent me home saying I had only pulled a muscle after some scans and a refusal to look further. I was bedbound for over 4 weeks until I was just about able to fly to Poland. There I had a scan, received a confirmed diagnosis and an immediate treatment plan. I will never forgive those doctors or that hospital. Story 50. Pancreatitis. 10 out of 10 abdominal pain lasting 6 to 8 hours each time. After about 8 years of episodes occurring a couple of times a year and many tests without a diagnosis, the cause was finally found to be my gallbladder. Story 51. I had a long needle injected into my eye before surgery. Oh my God. They numbed it, but I could still feel the needle. Story 52. Pancreatitis. The memory of that pain has kept me sober for 13 years and continues to do so. Story 53. I had a bowel obstruction. I was in screaming agony for 3 days after an initial diagnosis of the stomach flu. I went to a different doctor who pressed on my abdomen in a few places and diagnosed the obstruction. I was hospitalized, and the best feeling in the world was the first dose of Demerol. Story 54. I had a miscarriage at 11 weeks of pregnancy, and my pain tolerance is pretty good. Story 55. I was nearly killed by an infection in my jaw caused by 2 broken teeth. I tried to beat my head to knock myself out. Story 56. A severe urinary tract infection, followed by an allergic reaction to antibiotics, caused me to break out in hives. My whole body felt like it was on fire. Cold showers did nothing. Story 57. I had shingles in my early 30s. I nearly passed out from the pain. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Laughing out loud. Story 58. Have you ever been headbutted by a camel? If not, avoid it. It still hurts for days afterward. Story 59. I had my 2 youngest daughters by natural childbirth. They are both adults now. One has 2 children of her own, but I will never forget that level of pain. Story 60. The fact that they came out healthy, that I got to hold them immediately, and that each had 10 fingers and 10 toes eased that excruciating pain somehow. Story 61. I would differentiate between physical and mental pain. Physical. I broke 3 fingers on one hand. It was painful but not the end of the world. I have been bitten twice by dogs. The second time was on my leg. The dog clamped its jaw on my leg and tried to rip itself free. The worst injury will surprise you. A while ago I had a really nasty illness that caused my whole body to cramp on the second night. Everything cramped, including my jaw, which had my swollen tongue between my teeth. Once I managed to open my jaw again, blood came from my mouth. Afterward I was in intense pain. The lower teeth had left 4 to 5 millimeters deep marks on the underside of my tongue. I could not move my tongue for a week, followed by another 2 weeks of special creams and painkillers. That first week was awful. I am not a crying person, but there were several occasions when the pain was so bad I had to let go. Mental. The worst was going through the experience of the one that got away. It would have been perfect. Felt like I was dying for months afterward. Story 62. Temporomandibular joint pain. I have had 2 unmedicated births. I would give birth without pain relief 1,000 times rather than have temporomandibular joint disorder again. Story 63. I had piriformis syndrome and sciatica. I thought I had a slipped disc and went to the emergency room for imaging multiple times, but they could not find anything wrong. I was in pain for months. I was a single mother and my son was 7 or 8 years old at the time. I was getting all our meals from Uber Eats because I could barely stand or walk. I was in too much pain to sleep some nights. I tried all kinds of things suggested on YouTube, stretches, and exercises that were supposed to help. This was in late 2019 and early 2020, right when coronavirus disease 2019 was starting. I ended up quitting my job and sending my son out of state with my mother. I did not know what I was going to do. I was suicidal and thought my life was basically over since I was not going to be able to take care of us by myself and I did not have anyone to help. I told a man I had been talking to online for over a year, and he was friends with a chiropractor. He arranged for him to evaluate me, and he diagnosed me with piriformis syndrome. I started chiropractic adjustments 3 times a week, and within about a month I was completely pain-free. Saved my life. Story 64. A blockage in the large intestine was the worst. It hurt more than a broken leg. Story 65. I broke my hip in my mid-30s. I was strong and healthy but very tall and broad. I tripped on a set of stairs, landed on the edge of a step, and broke my hip. I have had numerous injuries over the years, including head trauma, for broken ribs at once, and torn ligaments, but nothing compares to how instantly sharp and intense the pain was when I broke my hip. I immediately became immobile. Recovery was equally difficult because I live alone. I had to take sponge baths at the sink for about 2 weeks because I could not support myself standing without crutches. I did not cook for about a month and relied on delivery or frozen meals heated in the oven. I refused stronger pain medication and only used non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs because I am terrified of stronger medications. Terrible experience. Do not recommend. Story 66. I was constipated for 2 weeks after having a cesarean section with my first baby. The pain was so bad I almost went to the hospital. Luckily something finally worked, but the pain when it passed was almost as bad as the day after I gave birth. Story 67. Debridement of scar tissue from a screw that had come loose in my reconstructed ankle. I will not forget it. I did not remember it afterward. I woke up screaming and was very angry because they would not give me any more pain medications. They had already given all they could. Story 68. I had pancreatitis. My abdomen was so distended that moving my arms and legs was excruciating. I had bounced back easily from 2 cesarean sections and shoulder surgery. I had never been bedridden for days before, and I was starving and nauseous. I vomited bile for 6 hours before I went to the emergency room. It was the worst experience I have ever had. Story 69. I took a post-tension cable to the face at work, breaking my nose and injuring the surrounding area. My face was black and blue for weeks, and I nearly lost both eyes. 0 out of 10. Do not recommend. I also suffered a dislocated knee that would not go back into place. I spent 12 hours unable to shift in bed without screaming. Story 70. Endometriosis pain, tooth abscess, and shingles. I would not wish any of those on my worst enemy. Story 71. Before May of last year, the worst pain I could imagine was breaking a molar without knowing, getting an infection, and feeling intense searing pain. This past May, I had a rogue sneeze while sitting in my computer chair at 40. My lower back did something funky. My whole body broke out in a sweat, and all I could hear was a high-pitched buzzing roar. I clawed my way upright and stumbled into the living room, where I almost lost it. I wanted to make it to my bed, turned toward the doorway, and then I woke up on the ground. I had passed out from the pain. I was able to get up and get into bed. I then proceeded to get very high. I stayed in bed mostly for 3 days, Thursday morning to Sunday. On Sunday, I was getting up every 45 minutes to move around as much as I could. On Monday, I was up as much as possible but could not sit at my desk for long. On Tuesday, I went to the city for a concert. The ride there was not great but not horrible. We stayed on the balcony at August Hall for the entire show. Great venue, great show, sleigh bells. I moved my hips as much as possible but nothing crazy. The next day I was almost completely fine. Remember to stretch often. I stretch every morning. Story 72. I suffered from sciatica from February 2025 to May 2025. I am still not 100% okay. I no longer have pain or tingling and can squat heavy again, but I know the damage has been done. A 2-plate deadlift already feels heavy for me. Back then it was easy to perform repetitions with 3 plates. I hope I make a full recovery before I am 40. I want to be stronger. I want to deadlift 5 plates for repetitions. Story 73. I broke my back. It felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my lower back. I tried to walk it off. I knew something was wrong, so I went to my girlfriend's workplace and told her I needed a ride to urgent care. She had to stop to get gas, and we finally reached urgent care about 2 hours after the injury. My legs gave out at the front desk. The pain was unbearable. It took several injections of pain medication before I agreed to be transported to the hospital. Story 74. It was either when I fractured my spine or during the first few hours after open heart surgery. Story 75. I was induced with Pitocin. It made me dilate very quickly, and oh my God, it had me begging for an epidural. Story 76. I have Marfan syndrome and have had 10 heart surgeries. In 2023, I was driving 4 hours to Boston to visit my dad, who had just had heart surgery. The entire drive was painful. I brushed it off. When I got to the hotel, I felt my aorta tearing. It was the first time I called an ambulance. I had a thoracoabdominal aortic aneurysm and an endoleak. The doctors do not know how I survived. The surgery involved cutting from the top of my shoulder down to my ribs, which were split open, and down to my leg. I was in the hospital for 2 months, and I am in a few medical journals. The worst part was finding out that one of my surgeons performed 4 surgeries incorrectly using the wrong parts. Now I have been given up to a couple of months to live because of that quack. 10 out of 10 pain. I definitely would not recommend. Story 77. Kidney stones. I would compare them to being stabbed. I stayed in the fetal position for hours, thinking I was about to die. Next was a kick to the testicles. I work out and am in great shape, but that does not matter because it is an equalizer among men. It brought me to my knees. Story 78. When I was 15, a tumor ruptured and I bled internally for 12 hours. I would not recommend it. Story 79. A kidney stone became lodged for 3 weeks before it was surgically removed. I still have the stone in my basement. It is very small. The second worst pain I experienced was severe dental pain that required a root canal. Years later, I had kidney cancer that was asymptomatic and would not have been discovered if I had not sat wrong or otherwise gone to the emergency room for testicular pain that turned out to be nothing. Story 80. I shattered my pelvis and fractured my lower back in a car accident. I also have a kidney stone. Story 81. Admittedly, I have not experienced some of the major painful life events such as childbirth, kidney stones, or severe fractures. I had turf toe in high school and was a competitive track runner. I kept running through the pain. The day after track meets, I could barely walk because my big toe hurt so much. I lived with my grandmother while growing up, and she, being elderly, put throw rugs everywhere on top of her carpet. One day after a track meet, I tripped, caught my big toe under a rug, and stepped on an already very painful toe. I nearly vomited from the pain, and writing this still gives me goosebumps. Story 82. When I was about 9, there was a swing right next to the carport. I would play on it all the time. That time there was a huge red fire ant pile right underneath it. I grew up outside, so I decided to keep swinging and try to avoid it. I was small, so it was not hard, but I ended up slipping off and landing right on top of the ant pile. The ants climbed all over my legs and torso. I began to cry and scream. My parents, who were on the porch, came to help me. Eventually they removed all the ants, but I had many bites, so anti-itch cream was my best friend for about a week and a half. Ironically, I have always had that mentality that I will be fine, and then the universe seems to prove me wrong almost every time. Laughing out loud. Story 83. Getting Harrington rods implanted to correct my scoliosis and straighten my spine was traumatic. Many moments following that surgery, including waking up, being in the intensive care unit, and recovering at home, left me with severe post-traumatic stress disorder related to medical procedures and needles. Story 84. Seeing the other person receive everything I had been working so hard for made me leave feeling empty. I know I should not compare myself or think negatively, but I felt worthless. Story 85. My chest cavity was cracked, partially caved in. I was not awake for long before I blacked out, but while I was conscious it hurt terribly. The second most painful injury was my shredded ankle. Only the skin and my Achilles tendon held it to my leg. You would think that would hurt more, but I could still breathe, so I was able to endure the shock while waiting for medical staff to stabilize it and bring the pain under control. Story 86. Recurrent corneal erosion following an eye gouge. That is by far the worst physical pain I have ever experienced. Story 87. I had my leg set after breaking it in 3 places in a half-pipe fall. My parents said people left the waiting area when they heard my screams. Story 88. She said I wasn't that funny and that she had been faking it for years. Story 89. Back in the old days, also known as 2017, 6-year-old me saw my mom's bike left out in the open. While she was getting on it, I put my hand in the spokes. She stopped, but when she started moving again, I reached into the spokes and my hands got caught while the wheel was in motion. I broke 4 fingers and my head hit the pedal. Story 90. Walking and putting weight on the plantar wart on the instep of my foot was the most intense pain I have experienced, possibly even more painful than childbirth. Story 91. 1. My 2 knee dislocations left me with mild post-traumatic stress disorder. 2. My kidney transplant surgery was the absolute worst pain I have ever felt. The surgeons make a deep, large incision to reach the area they need, and the bruising is severe. Pain medications do not help much. On the other side of that is a life free from dialysis, no fluid restrictions, and frequent urination. It is worth it, even though it feels like walking through hell to get to heaven. Story 92. I severely dislocated my knee in gym class during my freshman year of high school. My leg was hinged at a 45-degree angle and was completely backwards below the knee. It did not hurt if I kept it still, but it had to be corrected. I went to the hospital. When they grabbed my leg and forced it straight to pop the kneecap back in place, I screamed louder than I had ever screamed. It was the worst pain I had ever felt. I had even been given morphine beforehand. That said, my dad died in April. I would rather blow both knees out than go through that pain again, so I guess that is my real answer. Story 93. Migraines that made light, sound, and breathing feel illegal. Story 94. I got my finger caught in a slammed door. It was more painful than childbirth. Story 95. My condition has not changed since I answered this question several weeks ago. I still have kidney stones. Story 96. Cannot believe not a single mention of pilonidal cyst. Whether accidentally sitting on a baseball-sized lesion or the preoperative numbing with a 5-inch needle, it is a joke because it does nothing when they lance it. I have had gout, broken bones, stabbings, burns, and kidney stones. I am a mess, but I would take those 5 together before a pilonidal cyst lancing again. Story 97. I did not get a proper diagnosis because I could not leave the house, but nearly a year ago I believe I had costochondritis, based on my online research. It is an inflammation of the cartilage in the ribs. It causes sharp pain when pressure is applied to the rib cage, typically on the left side in my case. Sitting up was very painful but tolerable with distractions. The worst part was trying to lie down to sleep. Leaning forward to rest was painful. Breathing while lying down was so excruciating it was nearly impossible. I lost 2 nights of sleep and only managed a few hours when I could no longer keep myself awake and made myself as comfortable as possible. Around the 3rd day, which lasted about 4 to 5 days, I used a spare blanket to lie on to take pressure off my ribs. It was not completely comfortable, but I was able to sleep again. Hot water bottles and ibuprofen helped soothe the pain. By the 4th day, it was mostly gone. I have had bad scrapes and bumps, fell off a hill while riding a bike once and nearly bit my tongue, but never before or since have I experienced that level of pain and exhaustion. Not even muscle cramps were that bad. I would not wish it on my worst enemy. Story 98. A pilonidal cyst is being drained by an asshole emergency room doctor. It is so awful. Story 99. Esophageal strictures block food, drink, and even the natural flow of saliva from the mouth to the stomach. You are not choking, but every bit of saliva or fluid can feel like a knife to the chest. My stricture resulted from acid reflux. This grade of stricture does not go away on its own. It must be treated in an emergency room with dilation or with intravenous glucagon. This happened to me in 2006 and 2015. Lessons learned. Take stomach medication daily, drink less soda, chew slowly and well, sit and relax while eating, and try sparkling water with a meal to help with swallowing. Also, avoid getting angry and eating quickly. Story 100. I broke my femur, but I did not know it for a week because the hospital gave me ketamine. I spent that week hallucinating. Story 101. I broke my lower back when I was 14. It happened in a forest with a friend. I slammed my back on a rock. My friend had to carry me about 2 kilometers to his parents' house because my legs went numb when I stood up. His mother was ready to take me to the emergency room, but I didn't want to bother her, so I didn't go. I was stupid. I took a train home later when I could sort of walk. My mother said I was overreacting and wouldn't let me see a doctor. A few years later, before hormone replacement therapy, I saw a physiotherapist and told her about it. I explained where the suspected fracture was, and when she put her hand on the spot, she immediately said it was an obvious fracture even without an X-ray. The fracture was in a spot that shifts slightly with each menstrual cycle, so it did not fully heal until I started hormone replacement therapy and my period stopped. I spent about 6 years with a broken back, my legs giving out every month. You get used to chronic pain in a way that you don't expect not to be in pain, so when it finally healed, I was astonished. I could think clearly, sit comfortably, and sleep without pain keeping me awake. Story 102. I was circumcised at 17, and while I was still recovering, my sister kicked my genitals. Story 103. By far, emotional pain has been the worst. It echoes. Kidney stones hurt like hell, but they passed. Childbirth hurt too. The most intense pain is the sucker-punching, gut-wrenching shock of unexpected loss. Story 104. I stubbed my toe, but it wasn't just a mild annoyance. I hit it on the corner of a wall and the whole nail on my big toe split in two. 2 days later, both halves ripped off while I was at work. My boss sent me home after I took my shoe off on my break and my sock was caked in blood. I couldn't walk properly for more than a month. This happened 10 years ago, and my wife recently asked why I walk around the house in tennis shoes all day while she goes barefoot. Story 105. It wasn't even pain. It was numbness and the emotional pain that followed. My parents were amazing in some ways but horrible in others, and realizing I had to cover my own back because they were not reliable support was not fun. Story 106. I received adenosine 3 times. The pain was not extreme, but it was unusual and unforgettable. The situation may have increased the intensity, and it was painful. Story 107. I had urethral diverticulum surgery. I was under general anesthesia. The surgeons inserted a camera and instruments into my urethra, made a 2 to 3 inch incision, removed the diverticulum pouch, and closed it with many tiny stitches. I had a catheter and urinated into a collection bag for 4 weeks afterward because urine would prevent proper healing and each time was excruciatingly painful. The catheter passed beside the stitches, so any movement of the tube caused severe pain. I left the house only twice during that time. I could not wear trousers, so I wore a nightshirt and blanket at home and a long skirt when out. I could not walk more than a few steps and needed a wheelchair, and I was constantly worried people could see the bag strapped to my leg. I did enjoy not having to use the toilet because the strong pain medication caused constipation. My husband would empty the bag and reconnect it for me. The catheter was removed on Christmas Eve, and I spent Christmas trying to identify the strange sensation in my abdomen. It took about a week for my brain to relearn the signals to urinate. I felt like a toddler. Story 108. A contrast dye was injected into the shoulder joint for a fluoroscopic examination. A cortisone injection was administered between 2 lumbar intervertebral discs. Story 109. I'm really sorry you're in so much pain. Are you thinking of harming yourself? If you are in immediate danger, call emergency services, for example, 911 in the United States, or go to the nearest emergency room. In the United States, you can call or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are outside the United States, Please contact local emergency services or a local crisis hotline. I can help find numbers. I had major back surgery the day before Thanksgiving. As soon as I came out of surgery, I was flopping around trying to ease the pain and I could not. 2 vertebrae were fused to my first sacral vertebra. I was racked with pain for 6 days straight. Still hurts, but it is much better. I am taking a high dose of oxycodone and still have the pain. I need help managing the pain. Story 110. I had severe tooth pain. Realizing my sister never cared about me and only used me still hurts. Story 111. It was not a broken bone, being hit in the head with a shovel, or slicing my hand with an axe. It was backyard American football. I was in the end zone on my tiptoes when I caught the ball and fell fully extended into a rose bush. It was not a small bush. It was about 5 feet or 1.6 meters high. My whole left side was cut up with thorns embedded. Story 112. Mast cell disease, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, and endometriosis flare-ups are brutal in combination, especially when mast cells proliferate throughout the gut. I have had several occasions when I truly thought I was dying. Story 113. I had radiofrequency ablation on my neck. I was crying on the table. I am still not sure how I got through it. That is on par with back labor. Story 114. I got antiseptic spray on my finger after removing a fishing hook when I was 9. Story 115. I dislocated my shoulder. That shit hurt so fucking much. Now the U-shaped clasp that holds my arm in place is severely damaged, so I have to be careful lifting anything over 50 pounds. Story 116. I had a laparoscopic radical nephrectomy for kidney cancer. Laparoscopic surgery inflates the abdomen with carbon dioxide so the surgeon has room to work. The gas can irritate nerves that refer pain to the shoulders for about a week afterward. In my case, it also affected my neck, jaw, and teeth. The week after surgery was awful. It did not matter what I did. I was in pain whether I stood, sat, lay down, walked, or went to the bathroom. Good times. Story 117. My appendix perforated. I could barely walk but kept going to school until I developed sepsis. I just didn't want to put my parents out. Story 118. I was in a trial for a pain medication as a kid. I was told it would help other children. They took me off the trial because I was in pain. Looking back, if you ignore the dystopian aspect of the United States healthcare system, I was a good candidate. I went through at least 2 days of much more pain because I was told after surgery that I would be helping others. Yes, it turned out I wanted that, but it was awful. I had other surgeries between that and my dental surgery, and I specifically asked whether I would experience the pain and not remember it or not experience it at all. I did not realize there was a third option. Waking up to a man with a hammer while 2 people held me down and he chiseled in my mouth. That was likely the most traumatic thing of my adolescence, and oddly it does not make an interesting chapter in my book because no one wants to read that. Story 119. Childbirth. Also, I'm a man, so it was confusing as well as painful. Story 120. Gout. Shit is straight from hell. I've given birth to 2 10-pound babies. Story 121. When I was in labor, the baby turned to the right, headed down the birth canal, and got stuck near my hip. The doctor put her hand and forearm inside me to try to turn and guide the baby out. As tears flowed, I kept chanting that this could not last forever. My child is 16 years old now, but I will never forget the pain of being internally manipulated. Story 122. Probably not the worst of my life, but a few years ago my 2-bit crook of a dad told me, "You're nothing but a disappointment," because I was trying to get him to stop watching Newsmax. This was about 6 months after he almost died from COVID-19, after Newsmax and Fox News told him not to get the vaccine. He briefly changed his mind about vaccines after barely recovering, but after about a month of normal life he fell back into the Make America Great Again cesspit. Story 123. I took an ibuprofen that reacted badly with a bacterial infection in my digestive system. I was moaning in pain with severe stomach cramps and could not get to the emergency room for 4 hours because of the pain. Getting my feet fully tattooed 15 minutes after my belly tattoo was also a great experience. Story 124. I got the right side of my pelvis smashed in a car crash. It was unreal. Story 125. Childbirth. Not just the contractions, but during the last push, the burning sensation and the feeling of my skin tearing are things I will never forget. I love my child, but I will never have another. Story 126. The root canal was infected, and the Novocaine did nothing to numb the nerves they were treating. I had them pull the tooth and got an implant later. I now have 2 implants. Never again. Story 127. Kidney stones by a pretty wide margin. Felt like I was being ripped in half. Story 128. Indigestion caused a massive headache for me. One morning I had a piece of cheesy bread and Vietnamese coffee and I couldn't digest them. It was the worst headache of my life. I was sweating. My skin turned so pale that others became worried, and my hands were shaking. Forcing myself to vomit did not help. Pepto-Bismol and soda did not help. Gaviscon and a family member forcefully patting my back eventually eased the indigestion. The pain was so severe that I only ate congee and drank water for days afterward. I think I am very sensitive to Vietnamese coffee because they use different beans. Years later, I had Vietnamese coffee again and felt almost intoxicated, even more than from alcohol. Story 129. I fell off a ladder and tore my rotator cuff and detached 3 ligaments. I had a complete tear of the Achilles tendon while playing basketball. One ankle had to be totally replaced. I tore the other rotator cuff playing golf. I experienced a gout attack I did not recognize, and the pain was unrelenting. It reached an 8 to 9 out of 10 level and stayed there for hours. Story 130. Am I weird? Nothing has ever really hurt that badly. Sure, I feel pain, but nothing that makes me never forget it. I know it hurt at the time, and that is it. I have never broken a bone, never fallen off a building, never fired a power tool into my arm, never been bitten by some exotic animal, and so on. I have dropped a metal bar on my thumb. It throbbed for a day or so. I pulled the nail off a few days later and it grew back. I have had an ingrown toenail. I have had a toothache. I have fallen off a bed and injured my ankle, and then a year later did the exact same thing off the exact same bed to the exact same ankle. Yes, it all hurt, but nothing more than, arg, that hurt. And maybe a bit of throbbing or hobbling for a while. I could not even rank most of those things against the others, and I do not spend my days in pain. I barely ever take any painkillers. If I take an aspirin or paracetamol, I take one, and when I did, my exes used to treat me like I had broken my back because I basically never am ill or take medicine. Not because I have any aversion to medicine. I trust doctors implicitly, I just never need to. Honestly, if I take 2 paracetamol, you would assume my leg was probably dangling off at the knee or something. Mostly because I do not do dumb things. I just built a cupboard and I would literally move all my equipment and things out of the way to turn the tool the other way because it felt safer, even if it was just a simple shortcut with a power tool. I spent the previous night planning what to put where and how, and stopped and looked at the thing every now and then for 10 minutes before proceeding to make sure I was not making silly mistakes. I would stop and think, sit down and rest, or have dinner with the job half finished rather than carry on in a slapdash fashion. I find myself saying, no, let's not put that there. That's stupid, it's going to fall on someone. A lot when I am at home working or at work watching out for other people. I bought a set of scaffolding for working on my house roof. It is a bungalow. I will not go up a ladder higher than I feel comfortable, and I always check its footing and stability before I do. My power tools all have safety features on them, and I use them. If I put my drill down, I click it to the safety setting. I have even been known to remove the battery from any tool rather than just leave it lying around for even a minute. I always cut away from myself with a knife. All the things you are supposed to do. Worst injury in terms of cuts was closing a penknife on my finger when I was a kid. It bled a bit and I wrapped it in a towel from a dressing gown until it stopped bleeding. Worst in terms of bruising was dropping an iron bar onto my thumb from a distance of about 4 inches. Worst in terms of actual injury was injuring my ankle falling off the bed. It slammed into the ground, swelled up, and I was hobbling for a few days. That is it. Story 131. Shingles. I have had kidney stones. I have migraines. I have destroyed joints and broken bones. I have been stabbed and beaten. None of those compares to shingles. Story 132. 2 Bartholin gland cysts, each the size of a softball. Story 133. An undiagnosed sinus infection drained into my teeth. I could not sit still unless I numbed the pain around the clock by chewing ice. My dentist was close to performing a root canal before she suggested I visit my family doctor. I received a correct diagnosis in 5 minutes. Story 134. Divorce sucked. It's been 15 years. I'll never seek another relationship. Story 135. I was a passenger and was not wearing a seatbelt when my girlfriend pulled out right in front of a car coming from the left. The rearview mirror cut off my left ear. The steering wheel dislocated my elbow, and the gear shift lever went under my ribs and tore my spleen in half. The winner was the spleen, followed closely by the ear, with the elbow coming in third. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.